time to go around the world of sports with ESPN's Adam Amin. Good morning, Adam. How are you?
Doing well, Gary. How are you doing?
Doing great, my friend. I see you're catching a little bit of a break this weekend, which is rare for you. But boy, when you crank back up next Wednesday, you got a full schedule on tap. A lot of topics I want to touch on this morning with you. Let's start with the news that has broken this morning. Coach O's getting paid. As I said earlier here on my show, college football coaches, as a general rule, to me, are overpaid.
Right.
But the ones that win national championships are certainly worth their money in gold. And Coach O, to his credit, he took that job without a big contract, didn't worry about the money. He's earned this 7-year, $6 million deal, $42 million total, because of his national championship. And good for him. I mean, it usually works the other way around. You get the money before you have earned it. In his case, he earned it. Now he's getting the money.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, we've had this discussion about NFL coaches and how they're significantly underpaid compared to college coaches, but the work that goes into having to be a college coach and the pressure that has now been added to it over the course of, I don't know, Gary, what would you say, 15 years, maybe 10, 15 years, that significantly changed what the pressure is like and what the job description entails. And I think in this modern era in particular, it's that much harder now because, listen, this story is great. Like, this LSU story all year was fantastic. It was great to track. It was great to see. You love the hometown story. You love Joe Burrow. But things might get hard now. Like we talked about this. The Alabama, to me, is the favorite in the SEC West because I don't know what LSU is going to look like at quarterback next season. There's a lot of question marks. And sometimes this stuff is, as Nick Saban has proven, this isn't always just a plug and play, like they're, sometimes if you're Nick, maybe you can, because your level of recruiting is so high and it's so consistent, maybe you're going to be okay on a year-to-year basis. Clemson's proven that they can certainly be good on a year-to-year basis because of the quarterback position and their defense. But sometimes it's lightning in a bottle, with a lot of these other championships over a course of time, sometimes it's just lightning in a bottle. Sometimes you have the right coach, right assistants, right quarterback, right running back, right defense. Sometimes these things all come together, and that I don't know if you can't necessarily plan for that all the time. And I think I'm glad he got paid. He earned it. He earned the paycheck. He earned the guarantee. He earned all this money. Good for him. So regardless of what happens going forward, he'll always have that, and he'll have some security, but that doesn't necessarily mean that success is automatic with that going forward.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, 2010, we saw Cam Newton lead Gene Chizik coached Auburn to a 14-0 record. 2 years later, Auburn didn't win an SEC game, didn't win a conference game, and Chizik was out. So sometimes it's a great season, as you're pointing out, as opposed to, you win the national championship, Adam, and you got a whole new set of problems. All your juniors want to go to the NFL. The expectations are raised sky high. The fan base wants another national championship. You work to get there, but as you said, sustaining it is really the difficult part. And we'll see if LSU has staying power or not. But as you pointed out, either way, Coach O's getting paid, so he's good now. And
yeah, he's happy. Yeah.
And one thing about LSU, even their years they didn't make it to Atlanta, they still had great talent. So recruiting won't be an issue. Speaking of college football. Senior Bowl week, and I sent a crew down there earlier this week, and I said, watching the video that they shot, that Jalen Hurts is by far not the top prospect in this game. It's questionable whether or not, he'll make it in the NFL. We shall see. But he clearly was the most popular player there. Kids, media, fans, everybody was following him. He's like the Pied Piper, and he's just, he's earned that with the way he's handled himself. But from a NFL perspective, Adam, do you think he'll be able to make it in this league, if not a starter, even as a backup? What do you think his prospects? Because he wants to play quarterback. Now, if he has a role similar to what they're doing there in New Orleans, maybe that could help him long term. But what do you think his NFL prospects?
I mean, I would love to see Jalen in a Taysom Hill type role. I think he could be very good at that. But that's basing it off what we think he's strong. We think he's athletic. We know he can run. He certainly has the ability to throw. We've seen him catch the ball, a handful of times in his Alabama and Oklahoma career. So I think that's what we're basing that off of, right? And that there is a little bit more of a blueprint now. And this is what's happening in the NFL. These college concepts that we've all kind of been used to over the course of 15 years. these are starting to leak and bleed into the NFL. And I think it's great. Like, this is why Lamar Jackson can thrive and play quarterback. You know, I don't think 10 years ago there may have been a role for a Lamar Jackson type as heavily as there is now. Even Taysom Hill wasn't a great passer. He was a good passer, but he wasn't a great passer. He was one of the best running quarterbacks I ever saw, though. And he's turned that, parlayed that into a major role, not just a small role. It's developed over a course of a couple of years. But because he's been willing to do anything, you know, this is a role that, you know, maybe Tim Tebow could have had, 7, 8 years ago. But he really wanted to focus on quarterback, and that's fine. If that's your prerogative, that is your prerogative. That's what you want to do. That's fine. I think Jalen Hurts could find himself in a role in multiple spots. But do I see him right now as a starting quarterback? No, not in the NFL. And could he end up being a starter at some point? Yeah, but if he's a backup and somebody gets hurt, obviously he could be a capable quarterback. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but I don't see what I saw from Lamar Jackson. And I think Lamar right now is the blueprint for what you think of as a running quarterback or an athletic quarterback in the NFL. But let's not forget, Lamar was one of the best deep ball throwers in college football. He had one of the best arms I'd ever seen from a college quarterback. And along with that came this freakish athleticism and this excellent vision and this ability to maneuver around guys and have the speed to beat guys down the field. Jalen's a power quarterback, power runner with a decent arm. But this was, Gary, this was what the issue was when he was at Alabama, right? This is why people were clamoring for Tua. Well, Tua's a better deep ball thrower. He can get the ball to receivers better. He's just a better passer than Jalen Hurts is. So if that was the knock on him at Alabama and there wasn't much of a change at Oklahoma, I don't see how it's going to translate into the NFL. Now, listen, if he proved everybody wrong, I have no issue with that. Nobody's rooting for Jalen Hurts to fail at all. I just haven't seen the blueprint for him, for his skill set, to translate to the next level. That doesn't mean he can't do it, but I haven't seen enough of evidence from him and enough of a blueprint of the NFL to feel like those two things get married very easily right now.
Adam, do you think it helps Jalen, the person that he is, the perception that people have of him for being a class act, that there's an owner with all the, some of these players, we're dealing with Antonio Brown right now, let's be honest, they don't have a great off-the-field reputation, that it'll help him make a team because maybe an organization just says, we want this guy on our team, not just because he's a good football player, because of all the other things that he can bring to the table?
Absolutely. Like, if it came down to Jalen Hurts and another player of equal value in terms of what he brings to the field, but I have Jalen as a person, I want Jalen. I want Jalen on my team automatically. And I think people forget that sometimes. We have a tendency to treat these athletes as these kind of autonomous entities that are just made to, run, throw, tackle, pass, catch. Like, that's what we kind of view them as. When in actuality, the chemistry of a locker room is so key and is so essential to, like, listen, this San Francisco locker room, I look at them and I look at Kansas City's locker room. I'm not saying they're the only two, but because they're in the Super Bowl, well, let's just use them as an example. People rally around their quarterbacks. People rally around the captains of those defenses. People appreciate in that locker room the camaraderie that those players have with one another and with their coaches, with Shanahan, with Reed. Those guys really care about their head coaches, and I think that kind of permeates through the room. We've talked about that with New Orleans. They seemingly have this great locker room chemistry, and Breeze and Peyton are at the forefront of all that. Those things are important when you're playing this type of sport that has this type of emotional and physical intensity. And I've learned that from Pat McAfee and Matt Hasselbeck and working with these guys this past year. Like, the chemistry of a locker room is that much more important, maybe more so than we even realize. We could say that about LSU, right? Didn't it feel like everybody loved Joe Burrow? Didn't it just feel like everybody got along so well, and he was like everybody's dad and everybody's best friend at the same time, and everybody respected him? And when you have that, and it starts with coach and quarterback more often than not, you need that, and you need guys who buy into that. And Jalen would be the perfect locker room guy. And if you have somebody of equal value who isn't as good of a guy as Jalen is, give me Jalen, every day of the week, automatically. Yes, that is absolutely a factor.
Want to ask you about Tua, and I still believe that had Tua not gotten hurt, and he did, and in fact, he got hurt 2 years, and that's something you have to take into account. Now,
right.
Of course, the major hip injury, I still think he would have been the number one overall pick. But Lee Steinberg, his agent, obviously has been around the block a time or two. Tua announcing that he'll be at the draft in Las Vegas. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, Adam, but that tells me that Steinberg's getting positive feedback. I don't think you want to take Tua to the draft and have him there with cameras in his face if you don't think he's going to come off the board fairly early. I still contend he'll be a top 10 pick. I think either the Dolphins or the Chargers bite on Tua, even if he's not ready day one. Your thoughts on that? The fact that he's going to the draft, do you view that as a positive, that his folks feel good about where he's going to get picked in this upcoming draft?
I don't think Tua nor his family would make a decision like that if they hadn't gotten very good information. And again, these guys get draft grades. They go to the NFL advisory board and ask, what do you think? And I think that information has gotten better as the years have gone on. I think back to, was it 04 or 05 when Rodgers got drafted, and there was the assumption that he was going to be the number one pick or a top 5 pick or whatever, and then he falls later in the first round. So I think that information has gotten significantly better as the years have gone on. I still feel like, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, Gary, I think Miami would be the perfect destination for him, right? Like, it'd be a great spot. You can compete for a job or maybe even learn behind another quarterback, whether, I don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick, you keep him around for a year as a veteran guy. I remember Matt Hasselbeck was telling me this, where they wanted to keep Matt in Nashville when Jake Locker got drafted, and said, Matt, you're going to start, but your job is to mentor Jake Locker, who is our number one pick and our first-round pick, and we want you to mentor him and make him a viable starting quarterback, teach him the ropes, teach him what the mentality is like, what the approach is like, what the physical aspects of all this are. So maybe you keep a veteran quarterback around in Miami, and you let Tua Tagovailoa learn under a Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then maybe he's competing for the second spot with a Josh Rosen. And eventually, one of these guys wins out. I think Tua's talented enough to win out on a job at some point down the line. So I feel like it'd be a great spot for him. Plus, we've talked about Talia, and maybe he goes and finds himself a grad transfer position at a place like an FAU or FIU, plays some quarterback, finishes out his career, and then maybe gets to be with his family and be with his brother. I think that setup would be really interesting, and I think Tua should be. I don't think Tua and his family would make a rash decision. I just don't, based on knowing him a little bit. You know his family very well. I think everybody in Tuscaloosa appreciates them. I don't think they would make a decision like this without an informed background.
100% agree. Eli Manning officially going to announce his retirement today, and I'm sitting here looking at a column right now by Pat Leonard in the Daily News saying that Eli Manning isn't a Hall of Famer, but he'll get in anyway. Really a lot of split thoughts here on Eli. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame. I think the only question is will he go in, as a first ballot Hall of Famer. He won the 2 Super Bowls with the New York Football Giants, MVP in both of them. Beat the greatest dynasty we've ever seen in pro football. I mean, yeah, that alone ought to get him in. At the same time, I think it has overshadowed that the guy was what do you have, Adam, 220 consecutive starts. I mean, he answered the bell. I know he was 500 as a starter, but he won a lot of big games. He threw a lot of touchdowns. He was tough. Yes, how he handled the press should count in his favor. I mean, you see the 2 Super Bowls, and sometimes I think people act like that's the only thing the guy ever did. He played 16 years in the largest media market in this country, handled everything first class. You're doggone right he's a Hall of Famer. I'm just amazed that some people would try to debate that he's not.
Top 7 all-time in passing touchdowns. The Super Bowl pedigree, everybody seemed to like him. Everybody seemed to respect him. Like you said, one of the longest consecutive start streaks in NFL history. I think second, right, to Favre's 298 or whatever it was.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
I think it was beyond 300 if you count the playoffs. And like that, to me, in that market, with what he did, the magnitude of the Super Bowl wins, plus all the statistical information. I mean, I don't know what more you want. I'm fine with if he's not a first ballot, and I don't really get hung up. And I don't think any of these guys.
I don't either.
Yeah, I don't think any of these guys get hung up. I don't think Derek Jeter gets hung up on the one guy. Maybe he does, but I can't picture it at this point. Like Babe Ruth had guys that didn't vote for him. Ken Griffey Jr. had guys that didn't vote for him. I don't think anybody really cares at this point. And once those guys get into Camden, the bust is there and the jacket is on. I don't think any of these guys care whether they were first or second or whatever. I wouldn't maybe put him. I wouldn't guess. I would put him first ballot. I would guess that he's not going to be first ballot because there's going to be some split of people that say, well, he didn't do enough, or he had a lot of down years in New York or whatever. Remember, the defense was so good when they won the Super Bowl. Yeah, but you have to beat the teams that he beat. You have to beat those Patriots teams that he beat. And again, 360-some touchdown passes. I don't think there should be much question that at some point, relatively soon, as within the 5 or 6, it'll be 5 years. Maybe he gets in 6 years after he retires. So maybe he's part of the 2026 class instead of the 2025 class. So be it. I think he'll end up in the Hall of Fame.
Since you brought up Derek Jeter, I'm with you. He missed out by one vote. We had never had a unanimous Hall of Famer until Mariano Rivera a year ago, so I'm with you. I don't think it matters. He's going in. He deserves it. But I want to ask you about Larry Walker, because final year on the ballot, and it's a little bit like Manning. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to argue, well, he played in Colorado. Well, he also played in St. Louis and Montreal, but a lot of people play in Colorado. When you look at his numbers, and, was an MVP, over 2,000 hits, I mean, just they're Hall of Fame worthy numbers, in my opinion. I'm glad the guy got in, even though there's some people that say he's not a Hall of Famer. What did you think about Larry Walker getting in?
I was happy to see it happen, certainly. I thought, having an MVP, I know he didn't have like the traditional benchmarks. I know that, something like, I know Colorado can inflate your numbers, but he only played like 30% of his games at Coors Field.
That's right.
Like that's the other thing too. Like, people make an assumption that like, half his games he was playing. No, he played, like you said, he played for multiple teams. He was productive everywhere he went. He won. I know he won an MVP award with Colorado with the Coors Field bump. But again, 30% of your plate appearances are at Coors Field. I think there's plenty to talk about. Well, even if you want to look at metrics, I think there's plenty of WAR to talk about, wins above replacement for outfielders. Remember, he was one of the best defensive outfielders we had.
7 Gold Gloves.
Strictly a DH. He had won 7 Gold Gloves. Before he became a DH, he was one of the better outfielders that Major League Baseball had seen. So I think there's plenty of evidence there. I'm glad he got in. He had this last opportunity to get in. I don't think there should have been much of a question. It took this long for him to get in, so obviously there was some. The percentages kept going up until it finally got into about the mid-70s. I think that's fine. I think he had kind of a typical borderline Hall of Fame case and got in for a lot of good reasons. I don't think there's much of a case against him compared to how much of a good case there is for him. I think what's going to be interesting is now going forward, like, does somebody like Curt Schilling make it to the Hall of Fame? Because of what you thought, like you were saying with like Jalen Hurts, like the way he interacts with people, the way Eli Manning, that might help him because he was so good in the media market that he was operating in. The Schilling argument is starting to become more and more interesting. I watched that interview with Bob Costas the other day. And listen, Curt Schilling has said terrible things about people that share my background and whether it's ethnic or religious. So I have plenty to be offended by with the things that Curt Schilling has tweeted and said publicly and to his own accord. And this is under his own volition. If I'm looking strictly at numbers and strictly at performance and strictly at what he did, it's hard. I'm trying to keep this as objective as possible. I feel like I think I would vote him in. And I'm saying this as somebody who's been legitimately upset by things he said. This was a colleague of mine. Again, we didn't work together per se, but we interacted. He was at the Women's College World Series. He was jumping in on the broadcast at one point. Like, he and I had interactions, and he was perfectly fine with me. But he said plenty of things that have upset me. I'm trying to keep this as objective as possible, and I think I would vote him in. And I think these are the arguments that are that much more interesting going forward in this era and this kind of climate that we're in, determining the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'm with you, Adam. It's not a Hall of Character. It's a baseball.
Ty Cobb's in it, right?
Hall of Fame, and
I
still hope, and it's not going to happen. I wish Pete Rose would get in while he's still alive, but that's another topic for another day. Because I want to ask you about Zion, and we're getting up against the clock here. Obviously, he was on a pitch count his debut against the Spurs, but boy, after a slow start, that stretch in the fourth quarter where he scored 17 straight in less than 4 minutes, and he made 4 3-pointers. He obviously been working on his 3-point shot, even though it's a little bit flat. But, this guy is one of those special, charismatic, uniquely talented, freakish athletes to, be 285 pounds at 6'6" and move like he moves and see the floor. He gave us a taste of what's to come in the years down the road. And I think he's going to be special. I think everybody does. But what did you think of his debut?
Yeah, we were doing the game before. We had Philadelphia, Toronto, so we were leading up right into his debut. So we hustled back, and of course we were in Canada, so we were not able to watch his debut on TV. So I had to go back and watch on YouTube and watch on League Pass and try to get some of the highlights and then some of that stretch. He didn't do anything spectacular. And I know the three-point shooting, obviously, compared to where he's been, he never made more than 3 threes in a game at Duke, and he makes 4 in his NBA debut. But he didn't do anything spectaculer, and he didn't have to. I don't think he needs to be spectacular to have a great career, and I think that's where the hype and the pressure has, kind of clouded our judgment on Zion. That if he's not this freakish athlete that we saw in his 1 year at Duke, where he was so dominant, I feel like we're going to undervalue him. I said this when he got drafted. Gary, we've had discussions about this. I think he's going to be an all-star. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a Hall of Fame caliber player. I don't think he needs to be. He was so different at Duke, but a lot of the guys in the NBA were different when they were in college.
True.
They just were. They were
Very
the best
true.
athlete.
Mm-hmm.
They were the most freakish athlete. They were the best shooter on the floor. They were the best defender. Well, the speed ramps up. The athleticism ramps up now at this level. He doesn't have to do anything spectacular. I think he's a great piece on a team, by the way, that I think is undervalued. New Orleans has always dealt with injury issues. Anthony Davis was banged up a ton when he was with the Pelicans. Alvin Gentry never really has had like a full complement of players. Well, Brandon Ingram is a legitimate piece now, and he's playing great. Lonzo Ball has turned into a very solid point guard. Drew Holiday might be one of the 3 best defenders in the NBA, and he's an excellent secondary scoring option. And now you add Zion. This is a lineup that I think there may be 3 or 4 games or 4 back in the loss column of the last playoff spot in the West right now. I don't think there's any reason to think that they can't at least make a push if Zion plays at a certain level. His minutes are going to go up. He's going to get to 25 minutes a game at some point. If he can get to 30 and keep performing at this level, I think they've got a serious shot to at least compete for that 8 spot, because the bottom of the West, much like the bottom of the East right now, is very, very soft. So I think if Zion plays to that level where he doesn't have to do anything overly spectacular, he can shoot a little bit to spread the floor and get defenders out on him, I think New Orleans actually has a legitimate shot to make a decent run at maybe the 8 seed.
All right, Adam, we got like a minute. I do want to ask you about the K-State-Kansas brawl. Obviously, it affects Alabama, which hosts Kansas State tomorrow in the Big 12 SEC Challenge.
Right.
You do these games up close, courtside. Are you surprised this doesn't happen more with all the game now, with all the taunting and all the pointing and standing over guys? I'm really, it's as embarrassing as it is, I'm frankly surprised it hasn't happened more.
We live in a highlight culture right now, and I think guys want to be the highlight. And sometimes, in their heads, whether this is fair or not, maybe this is our fault as well for kind of entitling them to do it, or not enabling them to do it, because we enjoy it and we're consumers, and we say, oh, well, look, did you see this highlight? We retweet it on Twitter or share it on Instagram, and this might be our fault in some capacity. But these kids see this, and they go, well, I want to be the highlight. Maybe I think part of that is supposed to be standing over the guy, or to stare him down, or to point, or whatever it may be. I think everybody is a little bit culpable in this matter, but you can't. I mean, I'm a little surprised. I agree with you. I think I'm a little surprised it doesn't happen more. I'm glad it doesn't. But this is a very extreme case, and I'm not going to judge, hundreds of college athletes based on the actions of 4 in a rivalry game that was already a little bit tense to begin with. D'Souza was an idiot, and he's admitted as much. He's apologized for it. I don't think we can use the argument of, oh, he's just a kid, because this is like a 20-some-year-old man now who's a pretty scary-looking athlete. But I'm trying to give at least a little bit of understanding that at the heat of the moment, some things happen. I'm glad nothing escalated beyond what it did. If it had, this would be a much different conversation.
And finally, we know Father Time is undefeated. Serena with the early exit at the Australian Open.
Yep.
She needs one more Grand Slam singles title to tie Margaret Court, 2 to pass her. Will she get the 1 or maybe even the 2 before she's done?
I think so. I still think she is more than capable. She's still the most powerful tennis player we have, on the women's side, and I still feel like she's got a lot in the tank. We've seen a little bit of the regression, I guess, for lack of a better term, because of the time and the mileage that she has. But I have very little concern. I still feel like Coco's not there just yet to try to push her on a consistent basis. I think obviously she's maybe one of the favorites now to win the Australian this year after knocking off Osaka the other night, or earlier today, I guess. But I still think Serena has plenty in the tank, and I think 2 more is well within her grasp.
All right, folks. He's getting a little break, but listen to this schedule. Next Wednesday, he's got Bulls Pacers. Then on Thursday, Notre Dame Louisville women. Friday, Bulls Nets. Saturday, Celtics 76ers on radio. Monday, Oregon UConn women, which should be a good one. And I wanted to ask you about Tennessee and UConn renewing the rivalry. Didn't get to. We ran out of time, but it was good to see them play last night. I think you'd probably agree with me on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, a lot of intensity last night, Gary. It was fun. We appreciate it as always, man. We'll talk to you soon.